My name is Dave Hollenbach, the host of From Embers to Excellence, a podcast that explores the many facets of leadership from the perspectives of some amazing people. We discuss the triumphs and failures that have shaped our lives and our leadership philosophies. I've found that it isn't whether we fail that defines us, but when we do fail, how we respond. Leaders dust off the ashes and use their failures as fuel to work harder and as lessons to come back wiser and stronger, more resilient, more determined, and more committed to excellence. Today I'm talking with David Shar. He is the founder of Illuminate Performance Management Consultants. He has a bachelor's degree from Colorado State University, a master's in organizational psychology from the University of Maryland, and currently he is a PhD candidate at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. He is a keynote speaker. He is a consultant. He trains, works on developing training and actually delivering training that specializes in helping organizations improve their leadership and culture. Additionally, helping them combat burnout. And one of the things that we're going to get into later in the conversation is, well, prior to starting recording this interview, we touched on there's two halves, one of them being resilience training, and how that's only half of the solution. And really, we'll get into how a lot of organizations are really overdoing the resilience training portion and not addressing the other half. But first, like to get into maybe a little of your backstory, where you were born and raised, what your family life was like growing up, and really what set you on the path of higher education and really the particular path that you're on right now. Um, so if we can begin there, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dave. It's such a pleasure being on here. It's really an honor. So I'm born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, actually about a block away from the home I now live in with my wife and 5 children and 120-pound Bernese Mountain Dog. I always talk about how this past year and a half has been so difficult on so many people, but it wasn't the same for everybody. We like to say we're all in the same boat, but really we're all in the same storm. We're riding in a very different boats. While some people were extremely lonely over this pandemic and just wanted somebody to give them a hug, I was looking for the exit. I'm like trying to sneak away from my kids. I was never at one moment lonely. I definitely don't have anything to complain about though. Born and raised here in Baltimore. Originally I wanted to be a veterinarian. I didn't know that involved physics and organic chemistry. So it was sort of like a joint decision between me and every science teacher I ever had that maybe I should try something else. So I love business and I love psychology. So the natural fit was industrial organizational psychology or business psychology, which is really understanding the way we do work. How do you select the best employees? And if you're an employee, how do you find the right fit within an organization? How do you develop diverse organizations that are also inclusive? And what's the difference between those two things? And how do you motivate people? And that's really sort of my area of interest, motivation, creating meaningful work, and also preventing burnout. The way I got there, though, it actually started with ice cream. I was always very entrepreneurial. And so my first brick and mortar business was an ice cream franchise in the heart of Baltimore City. And most of my employees came from those rough streets that you see on, if you remember The Wire on HBO and things like that, really, really tough upbringings. And that experience of managing these people, I thought it was just getting into a business where I get to like scoop ice cream and maybe eat a whole bunch on the side. And I knew I was going to learn a ton about ice cream, but I ended up learning much more than I ever thought I would about leadership and business, and life and resilience and how we overcome challenges, and especially the role of leadership in helping people do that. I didn't realize that I was having an impact on my crew until one day this young lady who was a star employee of mine came in and started scooping ice cream, and I look, and she's not being as affable and pleasant as she normally is. She seemed closed off, like something was going on. So I called her in the back and I said, "What's going on?" And I noticed that there's literally tears coming out of her eyes. And she explained to me that her boyfriend, who was in one of the local gangs, this is a high school kid, he's in one of these local gangs thinking it's a game, was shot multiple times and left for dead that morning. And so he was flown to shock trauma, and they're working on him, but things didn't look good. So I tried like pushing her out of the store, like go home, be with family, be with friends, do something, go to the mall and don't think about it, or go home and do think about it. Why are you here? And she refused to leave. And I understood that money was really tight. And so I offered to pay her for the day and I would cover her shift. No big deal, like just go. And she stopped me and said, "No, I need to be here. I can only be here. This is my happy place." And that was, Mark Twain says the two most important days of your life are the day that you're born and the day you find out why. And they always say that was my second day. And my wife gets mad that it wasn't our wedding day or my son's birth, but that was such a significant day for me because I felt this weight of leadership and the responsibility that I had accidentally stumbled my way into helping create this environment where, in this time of chaos in her life, this is where she had to be. And that this is what made sense and where she felt significance and meaning when it was absent outside of those four walls. And so I started asking myself questions like, why do I have almost no employee turnover? I don't have problems with theft. I don't have problems with huge conflicts with my employees. Why do they seem so passionate? When you look around in other restaurants, they're turning over people. Over 100% of their workforce is being turned over every year. And so that's exactly what led me down this path to try to figure out what it was about this group of underprivileged teenagers, as opposed to the group of underprivileged teenagers working right across the street at the sub shop, and as opposed to my family and friends who are doctors and lawyers and teachers and social workers. Why were these people dreading going to work on Monday morning, where this girl and her coworkers were finding meaning and purpose in their work?
You were born and raised in Baltimore, and you're talking about the impact that, well, your leadership, the culture that you created in your ice cream shop, and I believe I read it was Cold Stone.
Yeah, yeah.
Your background, I'm guessing that you didn't yourself grow up on the mean streets of Baltimore City.
No.
So what, can you give me an idea of your upbringing and the school you went to, what your day to day was like, maybe your early influences, whether it's your parents or maybe a coach or a teacher, kind of, because you didn't just start or buy this franchise and off the top of your head go, this is the kind of culture I want here. Um, it seems like it was just natural for you how you how you probably how you treated them, how you spoke to them, um, to be able to have that kind of environment and have the loyalty from your employees that you had. Um, there's more of a backstory than what you've let on. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it was the experience with my employees at first. It was culture shock because I didn't grow up on the mean streets of Baltimore City. I grew up in the very nice suburbs of Baltimore City / county. I grew up Orthodox Jewish in a, upper middle class neighborhood. And there were a lot of elements of that type of upbringing. One thing was that I went to a religious day school and, never really connected at that deep of a level. So I always felt a little bit like an outsider, within the community growing up. And then outside of the community, growing up Jewish, you always feel kind of like an outsider at times. And so I think that really opened me up to experiencing culture and looking at things through the eyes of others and having empathy for different people. And I think that there was definitely an element of that. But more than anything, within my family, so my grandfather was a Holocaust survivor, and his entire being was that Hitler tried to destroy him and his family and actually succeeded in killing every member of his immediate family except him. And he recognized that as a choice, that when he got to America and his entire family had been murdered, he had this choice that he could give up and throw up his hands, or he could say, no, Hitler tried to destroy this. I'm going to rebuild this bigger and stronger than ever. And so he did that out of his own stubbornness. He had 4 kids of his own and named them after each one of those kids after the siblings that he lost in the Holocaust, and was so determined to rebuild. And then he passed so much of that on to me directly by seeing this, but also onto my father, whose entire essence was, could be summed up as attitude is everything. You can't always control your environment. The one thing that you can always control is your attitude. How are you going to react to that environment? That is always something that you have power over. And so I grew up with that, where everything good and bad that happened in my life, it was really about what I did with it, what I made of it, how I chose to see it, and how I chose to react from it. And so all of these things sort of combined for me to really think about, especially finding meaning in your work. I think people that don't find meaning in their work tend to be very lost. But those who find meaning only in their work seem just as lost. I think that life needs some sense of meaning, whatever that means to the individual. And I think generally meaningfulness is defined as sort of the search for meaning. It's almost the struggle of finding meaning is the meaning itself. But I think that it's really important to connect with your work. But what we find is that when you connect with your work and that becomes you and you're in it, and I know a lot of your listeners, as firefighters, police officers, first responders, especially when you're in objectively meaningful work like that, if that becomes your identity and that is who you are, and you're ready to save lives. And you very quickly, usually around year one, you learn that no, I'm actually tied down by bureaucracy and interpersonal conflict and all these things that distract me from being the hero that I signed up to be. When that happens, it's like your bubble is burst and you realize this is just a maybe more dangerous than usual job, right? And that's a really troubling thing to come to, whether you are a first responder or whether you're a lawyer or whether you're a teacher or a nurse. When you find out that that sense of significance that you're chasing, is it's not, it's your career is not like the movies. It becomes this almost midlife crisis at whatever stage of your life you actually are.
That kind of brings us to that burnout point. But before we dig into that, you said multiple things that made me think of Viktor Frankl's book, A Man's
Yeah,
Search for Meaning.
yeah.
He himself was a Holocaust survivor. And, you know, I, just a side note, I was introduced to that book by one of my professors in college, um, who recognized he is a veteran, a retired veteran, and he recognized some of the signs of PTSD in me. And he would talk to me before class and after class, and he himself had such an impact on me. But he told me that I should read A Man's Search for Meaning. He said that it would be huge. It changed his life. And, I've read that book, I don't know how many times now. And it, earlier this year, a nonprofit organization, the Good Canine Academy, gave me a PTSD service dog. And it's a Belgian Malinois. And it just seemed appropriate to name him Victor, uh, with a K. And he is such an awesome dog, but it almost seemed a little insulting to Viktor Frankl to name a dog after him. But what I see it as is this turning point in my life where I can actually start to really discover for myself what my purpose is.
Yeah,
After retiring and 23 years of having this identity that was what you're saying, it was, I am a firefighter, I am a fire officer, I am a battalion chief. That was my identity. Outside of that, I couldn't, everything that I did was tied directly to that identity. And I leave the fire service, and all of a sudden it's like, who am I?
yeah,
What's my purpose now? Because I knew what it was then, and now it's, man, I don't know what am I supposed to do now? And it led me to having this podcast, writing a book, and um, getting to speak with people like you, and really share this information that, you know I'm 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 positive. Actually, I know from feedback that I've received from the listeners that it's not only saved lives, but it's changed people's lives. And so, once again, I want to thank you for being on the show, because everything that we're talking about is, I mean, this is the stuff that young firefighters, fire officers that are mentoring young firefighters, chief officers, you know, that all they can see right now is within their bubble, and
Mhm.
they have anchored their purpose in the job.
Right.
And outside of that, one of the things I told you earlier is that, you know, had a couple of firefighters recently commit suicide. And prior to that, a retired fire officer that I knew very well. Um, you know, it's not something that people talk about. And the fact that it's still happening, even after the fire service is well aware of the impact that PTSD has on the workforce, and this resilience training that has been, the huge buzzword in the industry for, at least 6 years that I know of. Um, but it's still it's still there. There's still these issues, and people are still committing suicide and struggling with drugs and alcohol and infidelity and all these things that we know are symptoms of PTSD. Um, so, and I think burnout is a component of PTSD, or sometimes it's confused as, or used interchangeably. Burnout, PTSD, maybe we can start there and then kind of move into the other half.
Yeah. Yeah, if I could go back and just, because when you were talking about finding your meaning, I think, and Viktor Frankl, I think it's extremely interesting how often we think, and like I said, I found my second why, but the truth is that that's a moving target, and it is always changing and always developing. When you look at the psychological research on meaning, right? The way the scientists describe meaning, it's really about this tension, if not a balance, more of a tension. Specifically, one model lays it out as a tension between being and doing, right? That it's not all about being at work. Sometimes it's about stopping, and thinking and planning and just taking a break and recharging psychologically. It's between being and doing, but also this tension between the self and others. You find that people who are very selfish seem to live very empty lives, but also we all know those people who are just doormats and always giving for others and never giving to themselves, and their existence seems almost as empty. And so that's the psychological view of it. And I'm always interested in how it ties in with philosophy. And if you want to really think about philosophy nowadays, you go and you talk to religious leaders. And I know this sounds like a really bad joke, but one week I decided I was going to talk to a bunch of religious leaders, and I set up meetings, and I met with a rabbi, a priest, a pastor, and an imam, back to back to back. Not all together. That would be that would be a little too crazy for me. And I asked them, what's an individual's purpose in life? And it was so interesting, this theme of from all of them, that it was finding, that we have this collective final purpose, and that we all play a part in it, and that we all have a role to play. And it's life is about discovering your role, discovering your special mission. That if you're the heart, somebody else is the brain. If you're the right arm, somebody else is the left arm. You need to figure out what your specific gifts are, and utilize those to be the best version of you that you can be, right? And then only when we come together are we the full thing that you need. So it takes working with others. And I thought that is so perfect. And that describes work, right? I mean, like a healthy work environment, that's exactly what it is. We all know our roles, and we work with people who are not exactly like us because we complement each other.
Right.
But then the third sort of view of meaning is this existentialist view of meaning, which is that meaning isn't predetermined like most religions would tell you. And it's not a question of finding it. Instead, meaning is something that we create. I can't tell you what your meaning is in life, because your meaning in life is what you decide the meaning of your life is. And in that regard, often we get so lost in we've decided, or somebody else has decided for us, that this is what a meaningful life is, and we try to pursue that. And then when we retire, or when things go south, or when it doesn't seem meaningful to us, we think we've lost our meaning. We think we've lost our purpose. But the reality is, you define what a meaningful life looks like. My wife was once driving my two oldest kids when they were young. My 5-year-old son was in the middle seat. It was like late at night, super, super quiet, because she wanted them to sleep. My son is in the middle seat, 5 years old, looking out the window. My daughter, 3 years old, is in her car seat in the very back. Everybody assumes she's sound asleep. And my wife is driving, and they're passing this big field, and there's a whole bunch of deer. And so my son notices this, and he breaks the silence and says, "Mommy, what's the purpose of deer?" And my wife starts thinking, her brain starts moving a mile a minute, trying to figure out what is the purpose of deer, right? And so she's like, I don't know. What do you think the purpose of deer is? And so the two of them go back and forth and think, oh, it's to add grace to the world. Oh, it's to feed the foxes. That was his idea. He turned out okay. But like, they're going back and forth, and then the car goes silent, until this tiny peep from the back seat, where everybody thought she was sound asleep. My 3-year-old daughter says, "Mommy, what's my purpose?" And my wife couldn't formulate an answer to that. Is she going to be the first female president of the United States? Is she going to find the cure for cancer? Is she going to develop the next Facebook? And as she's thinking about all these things, my son at 5 years old cuts in, and he says, "That's easy, Rena. Your joy, that's your purpose. You make people happy." And so my wife had been indoctrinated, like all of us, that in order to live a meaningful life, you have to make it to the cover of Time magazine. And if you don't contribute something of that size, then better luck next time. Hopefully reincarnation is a thing, right? But what my son understood is that that's not what a purpose or a meaningful life is about. That's not what makes somebody significant. What makes somebody significant is, are they their authentic self, and having this positive influence on those around them, who then go on to have positive influences on those around them. My daughter, he was absolutely right. To this day, she's now 12. She brings joy to people. Other people, it's about truth. It's about honor. It's about kindness. It's about humor. Whatever their thing is, if it's their essence and they're impacting others in a positive way, that's a meaningful life. That will change the universe. You just might never recognize it. And so when we lose sight of finding that meaning in that big way, and that significance with a capital S, at work, we need to recalibrate and think, well, that's not who I am. Who I am everywhere. And I just have to be true to that. And I think we lose sight of that so quickly.
What an awesome story. It's really cool.
I learn most from my kids, more than all the expensive degrees, although my kids are probably more expensive than the degrees.
Well, can we move to the burnout piece and talk about the resilience training and the other side of that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, sorry, I totally sidetracked. I've got ADHD. I went in a different direction. But yeah, so then there's burnout, and there's the resilience training. And resilience is extremely important, because it's how we bounce back from hardships, right? And if you went through COVID regardless of what your organization did or didn't do, COVID probably wasn't the easiest thing you've ever gone through, right? And if you have somebody, you're a firefighter, a police officer, or a medic, and you have somebody die in your arms, I don't care what your organization is doing, that's going to take some resilience on your part to be able to, you know, come back on the other side a little bit stronger. Resilience is absolutely necessary in our lives, but it's one piece of the puzzle. And if we're not, the problem is that you alluded to is that organizations often, you know, when they see it, that they have a problem with burnout, they grab somebody who trains in resilience, and they're like, oh, we're going to teach them how to toughen up. But the organization is still not putting into place the structure, the policies, the culture that's going to support the people within the organization, right? And without that support, we know that support is strongly correlated, like directly connected to burnout. When we have support, we are less likely to feel burned out. And that support of all types: supervisor support and coworker support, instrumental support, meaning somebody who's actually there to help you with the heavy lift or with the paperwork or whatever you need help with, and also emotional support, when you just need somebody to listen or to be a sounding board or to give you advice. When support is there, we see a lot less burnout. When it's not there, we see a lot more burnout, because burnout at its core is emotional exhaustion, along with this cynicism and this reduced sense of personal accomplishment. And all of these things, the lonelier you are, the more on your own you feel you are, that's going to accelerate all of those three things. You're going to get exhausted a lot quicker if you don't have support. You're going to be cynical. You're going to feel like you're not doing anything, that you're not having an impact if you don't have that support and somebody who's there to tell you that you are. And so the question is, why are we always going right to resilience and telling you, you know, I've seen some resilience training where they're like teaching you how to do yoga and breathe. And it's like, okay, cool. Like that stuff's great. And I truly believe that stuff is great. But if we're doing that and not talking about how we are going to teach our leaders to support you more, and how we're going to be putting systems in place that give you the tools that you need to support each other, if we're not like getting rid of the bureaucracy wherever we can, because that emotional exhaustion piece, by the way, is not about overwork. It's not about, you know, I ask people, like, especially pre-pandemic, if you remember what a busy bar looks like, you know, and a bartender, and he's going out and he's got the flair and he's doing all this stuff. In that moment, that bartender very rarely looks burned out. And if you stop and ask them, they'll probably describe, you know, a process of flow, that they are in this, you know, sweet spot where time has sort of stopped for them, and everything is just happening automatically, and it feels so good. It's the exact opposite of burnout. But when do you see a burned out bartender? It's if every time that bartender, in pursuit of doing what he or she is there to do, if that bartender, every time they reach back for a glass, the glass is missing or the glass is dirty, now you have a burned out bartender. So burnout doesn't occur when I've got a lot of work on my plate. We get engaged by our work. We want work. But it's when there's all the silly stuff and unnecessary barriers and bureaucracy that stand in our way of doing the thing that we signed up to do. And so really, burnout requires those organizational changes, those culture changes, in addition to supporting people with their own resilience.
I can relate to that at a very high level.
Yeah.
And I would say that if we look at that through the lens of the fire service that I'm most familiar with, it can come in a lot of different forms when, you know, you're in contract negotiations and the firefighters haven't had a raise in 3 to 5 years, and the department is pushing back, and you know it really feels as though the upper management, the higher ups, don't value the work that the people are doing out on the street, and inundate them with busy work or paperwork or inspections or whatever there is, and then come down on them hard when maybe a mistake occurs, or uh, you know or oh well, oh, you're suffering from PTSD, why didn't you get help? We have all these resources. Too bad, so sad, it's too late now. And when that is the example that the people in the field are seeing, and it becomes that mindset, oh, I'm just a number to them. When I leave here, they're just going to replace me with somebody else. I don't matter to them. And what you're talking about is that organizational culture. And I believe that a lot of times the higher ups lose sight of how it's supposed to be, what their role should be, and that is that of a support function.
Yeah, absolutely. They get pulled away from the daily tasks. They get pulled away from the actualizing the mission, right? And so as they do that and they get deeper into their distractions, they have this theoretical idea of the mission, but they don't understand, or they lose sight of the muddiness of it, of about everything that goes into it and how imperfect it is. Oftentimes you see this in nonprofits where the executives upstairs are oozing mission. The people downstairs who are working hand in hand with the recipients, whoever they're trying to help, are completely burned out and overwhelmed. And it's like, what? Why are they overwhelmed downstairs? They're the ones who are working the mission. Why don't they get the mission? The reason is because they did get the mission. They came in for the mission. They were living the mission. But then all of the other stuff, it got overwhelming for them. It became so hard to do the job that they're there to do. And leadership lost sight of that, what that is. And so, like you said, that paperwork, leadership is supposed to have this bird's eye view where they understand the end goal of that paperwork. And they're supposed to be the ones that can help you connect the dots. Because I always say that just because a task might be mundane does not mean that it has to be trivial, right? There are plenty of tasks that we do, like the paperwork and things like that, that can connect directly to the mission. There is a strong why, but if somebody higher up, who by just virtue of their position, they have this broader view, if they're not translating that for you and reminding you and thanking you and showing you gratitude, like you just spoke to, if they're not doing that, then of course you're not going to see it.
So in your training, and when you do consulting for organizations, and you're trying to help them uh, shape this strategy for changing their culture, can you kind of walk me through the steps, or how you help them come to the conclusions of what they need to be doing, or how they can shift the culture?
Absolutely. So it's interesting because when people are like, what does it look like at an average day, an average client, it's always going to be different for me, because when you're talking about the organizational culture, you're talking about every aspect of it. And when you're talking about motivation, you're talking about every aspect of it. So sometimes I go into organizations and they've got their selection process all wrong. Like there's this concept is called a realistic job preview, right? An RJP. And the question is, how many organizations, allow their people to come in and they're telling them, this is going to be the best job ever. You're going to make a difference. You're on the front lines. We're the heroes. We're whatever. And not necessarily frontline, operations. We're talking like first responders. We're talking about like accounting firms, that we're going to make a difference. And they don't lay out the other side. Just like the applicant who's coming in is only telling you what's great about them and not warning you about the skeletons in their closet, they're not showing you their skeletons either. And the problem is that most burnout happens about the end of the first year. It happens early on typically. And it's because we go in there and have this honeymoon period. And then when it's not as perfect as we thought it was going to be, that we were told it was going to be, everything starts falling apart. So sometimes it's really the selection. Are you bringing in the right people? Are you doing it in the correct way? Onboarding them in the correct way? Are you setting them up for success? Other times it's, how are you developing your people? And what are you baking into your culture? Often I'll walk into organizations and I'll ask them what their core values are, and they'll read it right out of the handbook or the wall, or they can recite it word for word. And then I'll say, no, but what are the real values? Right. And if you can really gain some trust with some of those employees, there was one incident where the core value was teamwork. Like that was one of the core values they listed, right? I think they had some fancy phrase for it, but teamwork was a core value. And finally I was able to pull out of some of the employees that in actuality, what the organization valued was backstabbing, because you didn't get promoted for teamwork, you got promoted for backstabbing. And so you can tell your people what your values are all you want. Your people are going to recognize and define the values of the organization. And so really it's about going in there and talking to the employees, because there's so many blind spots. So when you walk into an organization, often the person bringing me in will tell me what the problem is. And every once in a while somebody gets insulted, but the first step of any consulting opportunity is to do an assessment, and sometimes they're like, what do you need to assess? I told you what the problem is. I'm like, you told me how you perceive the problem, and sometimes you can really dig and find that the problem is, usually they're in the right ballpark, but pointed in the wrong direction, or this is the surface problem and there's something deeper underneath. And so when I go into organizations, oftentimes there's a lot of turnover. There's a lot of, interpersonal conflict, a lot of underperformance, which are indicators that there might be burnout there, that there's something going on. But you really have to start digging to find out what's what within that specific organization.
I want to make sure that people that may be interested in your consulting services, or if they're interested in having you do a keynote, because all of this is such powerful stuff. And I haven't heard you speak, but I can only imagine how powerful a keynote by you is. Um, if somebody wanted to book you, what is the best way to go about booking you? Would they go to your website?
Yeah, they could go to my website. They could reach out to me directly. A lot of times people just email me, david@illuminatepmc.com, or they will find me on LinkedIn, where I'm extremely active. So that's LinkedIn/IN/David Shar. You can find me there. And I try to add a lot of content there as well, to help people figure out some of these issues.
Yeah. Well, what I will do is I'll put a link to your website, a link to your LinkedIn page in the show notes. And I noticed on your website you also have your phone number. So if somebody wanted
Mhm.
to reach out to you directly and speak to you on the phone, they can do that. But before we go, I like we've covered a lot of ground in such a short period of time. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that for you is key uh, that we should have talked about?
So the one thing I would say is right now, um, this period of time post COVID, we're thinking, oh, we're done. And when we talk about a potential second or third wave, we're talking about COVID coming back. I think the actual second wave of this thing is what's starting to strike us now, where according to some surveys, up to 41% of employees globally are looking to switch jobs, if not careers. They're calling it the great resignation. And I think so much of that is that we've had a moment to think about what is meaningful in our lives. And we've had a moment where, it's this type of change, this revolutionary type of change where as one of the change management, original researchers puts it, it's not like playing a game of basketball where you take down, the net. It's like taking the entire, hoop and all off the court and trying to figure out what the rules of the game are now. We've created this reality, what work is supposed to be and home life and all of that sort of been flipped on its head. And as we go forward, a lot of people are looking for meaning, and now more than ever. And I think it's extremely important for employers and for employees before jumping ship. I would recommend people to look within their own backyard and see if maybe there are opportunities within. I just spoke with somebody recently about job crafting, and about if you're not happy or feel fulfilled within your spot right now, open conversation, open communication. Communication should always be happening two ways within an organization. And so if you're an employer, talk to your employees. If you're an employee, talk to your employer or manager and try to figure out, are there ways that we can make this work? Are there ways that we can, that I can continue to grow? None of us want to feel stagnant. And I think that that's a big piece of it. And so I think we need to explore inside before jumping ship. And obviously, if there's nothing for you there, then it's time to go look. I'm just very concerned that what we're going to see is this massive migration from one business to another or one industry to another. And we're just going to find the same problems there. We have to look inside ourselves and inside our organization first and see if it's something that we can solve.
One thing that I've talked to people about in the past is culture change and where so I had a debate, and this was probably 12 to 15 years ago when I was a young fire officer and just super motivated to change the culture of my department. And my idea was it's going to take at least 10 to 15 years for all the people above me to retire out. And the investment that I would make is developing the incoming firefighters and my peers and really focus on leadership development and
Mhm.
what it means to be a leader and really how when you take on that responsibility, you're obligating yourself to really support those people coming in, and really devote yourself to helping them develop in such a way that they can realize their version of success. And so when when people move up through the ranks and they have that mindset, not only do they have to have that mindset, but they have to have experienced it themselves. And what I found is 10 to 15 years isn't long enough when you're starting at the bottom. And then if you leave it up to the people at the top to make that culture change, when they've spent their entire career moving up through the ranks with a certain mindset and they've achieved success by being a certain way, they're not going to see an issue with the way things have been. And they're going to feel as though the culture is fine. These people just need to toughen up. Look at what I've done. So where is the sweet spot? Like, how can you change the culture?
Yeah, that's beautiful. Because leadership can't dictate culture. Culture is that gooey part within the organization made up of habits and behaviors of everyone, right? And so everybody is a contributor to the culture and a victim of the culture, from the CEO to the new hire. And that's the beauty of culture, because when everybody works together, they can have a great impact on that. And that's why it's never a good idea to just come in and tell your employees, you need to toughen up, or you need to do this, or you need to do that. Just like it's never a good idea to go in and just say, you need to change this policy and this policy and this policy. The policies, the written policies, the structure of the organization is going to influence the culture, but it doesn't create the culture. And so anybody at any level can start to have this impact on their culture. We know, like I told you, support is intricately related to burnout, right? The less support you have, the more you burn out. Well, what we also know, another relationship that we're very familiar with, is that people who give more support receive more support. So there's, I heard somebody once say, and I wish I knew the person's name to credit them, but he said, you've got to choose. Are you going to be the thermometer or the thermostat? When you walk into a room, do you decide that you're just going to take its temperature like a thermometer and say, "Oop, it's toxic in here," and then either join in or back out slowly? Or are you going to be the thermostat? The thermostat reads the temperature, but it sets the temperature, right? And we all have that ability, but so often we sit back and we play the victim part of it, and we're ready for the other to change things for us, and there is no power in that, right? There's no control in that, and control is very much tied to burnout too, and we and depression. So we start feeling this lost sense of control. You want to take back control. Take back control. Start just impacting what you can. Again, it goes back to Viktor Frankl and our attitude, but also the next step of our attitude affecting our behaviors, which in turn will start to affect the attitudes of others. Our moods are extremely contagious, but it's not just bad moods that are contagious. Good moods are contagious too. And so if we decide that it's going to start with us, or we get a small cohort of people together who decide that it's going to start with us collectively, you can create change within your organization.
Which is directly tied to the teamwork component.
Right, exactly. And tied to, we get so tricked to think that power is a legitimate power, right? That if I'm higher on the organizational chart, right, then I have power. And also, if I have the power to punish you or I have the power to reward you, I have power. Back in my management days, people used to come to me all the time and ask to be promoted to manager or supervisor or whatnot. And I would say, no, I don't do that. And they'd say, what do you mean? You just did that for so-and-so. I said, no, I gave them a title. I can't promote you to a leadership position, but I'll give you the title once you're there. Because if you want to be promoted to that leadership position so that you'll have this, now you'll be wearing the leadership hat, right? The manager hat. And now I'm going to give you, a carrot and a stick, to officially reward and punish everybody. I'm not putting that in your hand. You have to be a leader first. And so we know that referent power, this power that comes from being in control of ourselves, from our own emotional intelligence, from our own attitudes and behaviors, being contagious to others in a positive way, that referent power is more powerful than any of those other things. And that's why, from your experiences within organizations, there's always that person that's clearly the one really running the show, even though they don't have the title. And there's always that manager who has the title, but that means you'll do what they want when they're in the room and change, go right back the second they leave the room. It's because we have this basic misunderstanding of power that the truth is we all hold this potential power. We just have to wield it.
David, this has been such a great conversation. I want to thank you very much for coming on and sharing so much. I consider myself extremely fortunate to have met you and to have this conversation with you. And I am excited to see what kind of impact this conversation is going to have, because I feel that as much as we've talked about um, leadership and the resilience and burnout component, but more importantly, the role of an organization and an organization's leadership and really supporting and really, I don't know, showing that they value the people on the front lines, how important that component is, and um, really reducing the amount of burnout. And I'm guessing that it also improves the the effectiveness of resilience training.
Yeah, absolutely. Because now we're not in it alone. When we work on these things, we know we've got. I mean, how cool is it to have an entire organization at your back instead of on your back?
Yeah. Thank you so much, and I will make sure I have your website and your LinkedIn page linked in the show notes. And I really hope that uh, you get some business out of this episode, because I think that anybody listening that is in a position to hire you will do well by doing so.
Thank you for saying that. This was an honor to be on your show. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of From Embers to Excellence. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Follow me on your favorite podcast platform and visit hollenbachleadership.com for additional content. My goal is and always will be to add value to as many people as possible. So if I can be of any assistance to you or someone you know, please connect with me via email or on one of my social media accounts, linked on the homepage of my website. Remember, our failures don't define us unless we let them, and the only true measure of a leader is the success of their team.